That's James's burger of today with some fresh organic shiitake mushrooms today. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, James. Because I tried some of the, and I'm trying them on my salad this time, but I tried some of the shiitake yesterday.
And they're actually
And
good.
they're good. They're way better than the dried ones. Way better.
Pauline is not a big fan of shiitake mushrooms.
It's a strong flavor, and it's not a flavor I like.
Whereas I like pretty well any type of mushroom. It doesn't matter if they're the button mushrooms or shiitakes or whatever. Just so long as they're not poisonous.
Well, I can put them in burgers. Like if I grind them up, they're okay. But eating
the shiitakes,
yeah,
they're regular. But you're saying these are awesome.
These are good. These I could eat in rice or like with anything.
Without grinding.
Yeah.
It's quite a delectable serving that Pauline came up with
for your burger today.
Yeah, it's very
well. There's avocado and cucumber, and there's some.
Just so that you can see the tomatoes here.
So you can see the tomato.
Delectable part of it. Most delectable, I should say.
My salad's not that interesting. It's just the greens. And
well, a salad's awesome.
Apple cider vinegar, olive oil, and shiitake.
The salad helps me deal with the side effects of that takes.
Yeah, that's what James has found.
It's amazing how effective it is. If anything, more effective than the medication they've given me. The count of the medication that I'm taking. Counted this. So, do you have anything or many things you want to know? As has been my practice many of the times the last little while, about a month or so, just want the people in Ukraine and also Ukrainians outside of the Ukraine to know that we've got them in mind. It's a Kiev photo album. It's a mispronunciation of the name. This is Shevchenko. This is his complete collected poetic works, 2 volumes. Got it in Edmonton. I actually translated one of his poems, probably rather poorly, but hey, you know, at least I'm trying. And that was a long time ago. It was about 30 years ago. Kiev. Barva. Osen. So in the colors of autumn. Translate that. So I bought this when I was in Kiev. I always say Kiev because that's what I thought. Hope you'll excuse that. It's nothing ill is intended. Kiev, 31 years ago. And it's just after the fall of communism. Unfortunately, it's back again. I won't say worse than ever because it's going to be hard to beat the atrocities committed by atrocities, kind of like an understatement, committed by Joseph Stalin. But I think he killed maybe 10 million Ukrainians in the space of maybe 3 years. 1930, 29, 30, 30. Horrible person. Certainly qualified as a person. Putin, I'm afraid, is the same way. So we're going to have to take him seriously and deal with him seriously. Now's the best time. He's got his clutches on, they were saying, some so-called expert on CBC, that he's got his clutches into maybe 20 third world countries. So that doesn't seem like much until you start thinking, geez, that's 10% of all the countries in the world. And really, when you think about it, this horrible humanitarian crisis, as they call it, in the Ukraine, the previous horrible one, and it's still ongoing, was in Syria. And we could blame that on the Alawites who are in control in Syria, but who really got it going was Putin by flattening the cities in Syria. So this guy will be doing it wherever he's supporting a dictatorship, as soon as the people don't want to support the dictator.
I have to wait until my mouth's not full. I don't understand why the people in Syria want to fight for Putin if he leveled their cities.
Okay, so a lot of countries in the so-called third world, and in the third world, are legacies of something like colonialism. Even when they're not, there are going to be there are going to be problems. Like if you have a country kind of scrunched together. For example, the place where I was born, I think it's roughly the area of Alberta, Zambia, and it's then called Northern Rhodesia. I think they say there's 89 different languages in it. And can you imagine 89 different languages? Probably more like dialects and stuff like that. 89 languages or dialects in an area the size of Alberta.
So you're saying some people were keen on Putin in Syria?
Oh, absolutely. So the people in control, still in Syria, and they were in control in 2011 when the Arab Spring hit. It's one place where the Arab Spring wasn't, at least initially, successful. So they were Baathists who were in control then, and they are now. So what's significant about the Baath Party? It's like it's Renaissance, and the Baath Party was the party in control in Iraq for so long under Saddam Hussein. Now in Iraq it was a minority who were in control. Saddam Hussein was a Sunni Arab, and they were 20% of the population. Now, a lot of people are going, oh, that's a colonial legacy. Yeah, but they're saying the Europeans were in power in Iraq, the Brits, for something like 20 years. And they're supposed to have ruined it. Come on. Things like that. The Americans were in Iraq for like 8 years, from 2003 till 2011. You see how the Brits, and they have hardly changed anything, it's the same problem. The Brits were there 20 years. They changed nothing. The colonial legacy that was made there was made by the Ottoman Turks, fellow Muslims. So what happened was they controlled Iraq, all the way down to the Persian Gulf. They also controlled Kuwait, maybe a bit of Saudi Arabia, south of there. And the Turks, Ottoman Turks, were Sunnis. But the majority of people in Iraq back then were Shias. So you think they were going to have Shias rule Iraq for it? No. And were they going to have 20% of the population that were Kurds? It's probably something similar to what it is now, 20% of the population. The Kurds have been notoriously unreliable. They've been kind of like independents. Like, for example, the women don't have a tradition of wearing face veils and stuff like that. The Kurds go back, from what I can tell, to the ancient Kuti or Bhuti, and they actually ruled over Mesopotamia before it was Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is a Greek designation. So it was like around. It was I believe it was after the Akkadian dynasty. This dates 4,000 plus years ago, and they were during that period. This is what it says in the Sumerian king list. The Akkadians were incredible. They're the first multi-continental empire, from what I can tell, aside from the Egyptian empire kind of spilled over in Asia. But they came a long way to take over Egypt. Now, the conventional wisdom is, even though they described conquering Egypt, they say, oh, no, that's not Egypt. That was Oman. No, it's Egypt. When they said they conquered Magan, the ancient Akkadians over 4,000 years ago, that was the Assyrian designation for the delta of Egypt. You cannot go and say, oh, that was Oman, because my reaction is, oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man. These records are precious, and you can't go do garbage like that just because your archaeology is all screwed up because of Flinders Petrie. A systematic racist. You are systemic racist when you go along and you accept for Mesopotamia, a screwed up dating of the archaeology for Egypt, which really doesn't exist, but extended archaeology of Mesopotamia, wherever, anything that's where you find artifacts that were found in Egypt. So it's a Jemdet Nasser period, dated severely wrong, and it's because Flinders Petrie, William Flinders Petrie, I hesitate to say sir, just could not accept that civilization could have been co-founded in Egypt. It had to come from somewhere else. He was hoping to find European influence there, but he settled for second best for him, and he found Mesopotamian influence. And then he said, okay, that's got to be the beginning of Egyptian civilization. No. That was the Akkadians in there. And he was off by 900 years. Yeah, 900 years. And so when you find this Mesopotamian stuff that they find in the middle part of Egypt, but they date to the beginning of Egyptian civilization, let's say 3000 BC, then they find this Mesopotamian stuff that they find in Mesopotamia, and they say, that's 3000 BC, and it's not. It's like 2100 BC. Stupid fools. Racism, because he couldn't accept that civilization was developed, co-developed in Africa, along with Mesopotamia. It comes from somewhere else. So say, okay, it's Mesopotamia, and that's the the Akkadians. They've got that material there. It's dated to 3000 BC, misdated, and there's no way they'd even think it's Akkadian, but that's the material from when the Akkadians stomped in there. They're saying, hey, there's no proof. Like Al mentioned, there's no proof. There's no Akkadian material in Egypt. Yeah, there is. It's just misstated severely. It's hard to get off by, like for the later Egyptian stuff, it's off by 500 years. But for the early stuff, it's absolutely whacked out. It's because of this racism. Anyway, what was I talking about? It's probably about Putin. Anyway, the world has got to get rid of that guy, because there are going to be. This is just the beginning of what he's got planned. He wants to, frankly, control the world. Like he'd love to control the moon, I'm sure. All this sort of stuff, Mars. But he'll take whatever we allow him to take. And the unfortunate thing, once he gets into a place like Syria, he will destroy. There will be huge humanitarian crises wherever he goes. And it was hugely destabilizing for Europe to get the Syrians in there, starting 2015. It's going to be really got bad. It's going to be bad.
The whole world's refugees will not fit in Canada.
Canada, United States, Europe. The refugee crises he'll be creating will be stunning. This guy is a little bit older than me. He's not even 70, I don't think. He's under 70, and he could live another 30 years. Increasingly wackazoid, and we've got to play whack-a-mole with him. I'm not saying kill him, arrest him. Russians, whoever managed to listen to this, you had better arrest him and turn him over, not to the world court. Those guys are a bunch of flunky idiots. Turn them over to the Americans, so the Americans can hold what they've been threatening to do. Not promising yet to have something like the Nuremberg trials. Turn over anyone who might want to follow in his very bloody footsteps to the Americans, so they can try. The Americans are very, very, historically have been very, very patient and tolerant of commies and things like that. I think they only killed 2 commies during the Cold War, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. When it came to processes like that, they were actually very tolerant of Nazis, after the World War II and stuff like that. They've been tolerant with both sides of the political spectrum. So they might not, I don't think they'd kill Vladimir Putin. But I'm telling you right now, you do what you have to in order to survive. If you arrest him, you figure that he might escape and kill you. Keep that in mind. And I'm not telling you what to do in that situation. So what we're looking at is just mass production, industrial strength, ethnic cleansing and refugee crises if this guy is allowed to continue. So people are going, oh, this is awful. We can't put.
Well, it's not only that. I mean, if he's probably going to turn things really bad, really amp it up in November. And then
well, in Ukraine,
what
it's still
will
going
Europe
on.
do about oil and
Yeah,
frankly, what is Europe and Saudi Arabia? What will they do about grain once he? Right,
he's going to be turning on all the screws.
ridiculous.
This is why he wants the Ukraine. He really wants to hold the world. I mean, 30% up until this crisis. 30%. Well, it's a humanitarian crisis. It's just a war criminal crisis. He's a war criminal. He's a terrorist, gangster, monster, really, if we're using the stir words. But yeah, he wants to control 30% of the world's oil or grain exports. He already controls. Russia's the third biggest oil producer in the world, next to the United States and Saudi Arabia, and a lot of that would be for export. Got to stop them. Actually, the Soviet Union's Russia has got to be rolled back to the boundaries before Peter the Great. Peter the Great is apparently the big hero, one of the big heroes, if not the big hero, Vladimir Putin. And he's the guy, Peter the Great, who got Russia access to the Black Sea. They're not native to any part of the Black Sea. Russians, they shouldn't be allowed access to the Black Sea. They shouldn't be allowed access to the Arctic. They do not have, and of course they shouldn't be allowed access to Siberia. A lot of their oil comes from near Siberia, just across the Ural Mountains, around Tyumen, places like that. They shouldn't be allowed in Siberia at all. They should. The Russian Empire should be rolled back, just like the British Empire was rolled back. In the wake of World War II, the French Empire was rolled back. In the wake of World War II, the Dutch Empire in Indonesia was rolled back. After World War II, the Portuguese Empire was rolled back. A little bit later, about 1975 and stuff like that. The Russian Empire's got to be rolled back. And it might involve some relocating of Russians. It would be ethnic cleansing. It would be done, what you look at is were Russians complicit in suppressing people in these various sorts of places in Siberia, so on and so forth. And those who've been complicit should be deported, convicted, taken through fair political or judicial process, and then, if convicted, deported and stuff like that. So that should, of course, happen in the Ukraine. But once the Ukraine wins, they should win. As someone said, Putin is playing smartly with a very weak hand. He doesn't have anything in his hand, really. It's just cards that have no connection with each other. But he's playing smartly. He's bluffing. And the NATO and the United States so far have been going, geez, better not escalate. So, okay. Because if you start thinking that way, he will take the whole world. You've got to put your foot down, and preferably on his neck. And this is the time to do it before he really starts causing huge humanitarian crises around the world. Before he gets control over places like Central African Republic, he'll be getting control, and then he'll be blackmailing people. He'll be trying to blackmail Europe into letting him have Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, for example, letting him move into places like Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, Moldova, all these sorts of places. Kazakhstan's huge. How big is it vis-a-vis the United States? Might be a quarter of the land area of the United States. I'm not kidding. Check a map out. Check some stats out. Get on the internet and actually use it for something other than piddling around on Facebook or whatever. He's got to be dealt with, and the sooner the better. It's just like the Europeans should have taken care of Hitler when he started militarizing the far side of the Rhine, or when he occupied the Ruhr basin. That's when he should have been taken care of. But they let it go on and on and on, 6 years, and then all of a sudden they had World War II going, and that wasn't ended until maybe 60 million or 65 million deaths later. Of course, the Japanese were involved with a lot of those deaths. I think 10, 15 million people killed in China, and lots of people killed elsewhere. Vietnam, I think the Japanese killed 1 million people just in 1945 using the scorched earth policy. Stuff that you never hear about. The Americans actually didn't expose because the Japanese during the Cold War were an ally of the Americans, so we didn't really hear about the horrible atrocities they were committing. You eventually heard after the end of the Cold War about the rape of Nanking, and there was a similar thing happen. 100,000 people maybe were killed by the Japanese when they took over Nanking, and somewhat similar numbers when they took over Shanghai. Somewhat lower numbers perhaps, but some people say 100,000 killed when they took over Singapore. So a lot of atrocities, but we weren't told about them. The reason why we were told about the German atrocities is because the Russians were talking all about them. So the commies who were on the side of the Russians here in the United States, they were exposing them, stuff like that. But the Russians hardly fought against the communists. They just came in when there theoretically just should have been a few days. They, because they came in after the first atomic bombs landed on Hiroshima and exploded by Hiroshima. But they were so cynical. The Japanese surrendered to the Americans, and they surrendered to the Russians. The Russians had only been involved for a few days. And the Russians said, "Say what? I can't hear you." And they kept on, "What? You want to what? You want to keep fighting?" And they took land. That's how they got into Korea and stuff like that. Thoroughly cynical, horrible putes. That was under Stalin. Putin's not much better. A little more competent at it. I wonder if I've got time to kind of deal with these.
You have about 7 minutes.
7 minutes, so at least introduce them. So Isaac Asimov translated into Spanish, Cien preguntas básicas sobre la ciencia. Sorry about the pronunciation. I'm trying. And then Freud translated, I suspect, from the original German into French. Yeah, traduit d'allemand. Translated from the German. So it's originally German, but it's in the French. Troisième sur la théorie de la sexualité. Again, pardon my translation. I am trying. And I got through these books. Took me a little while, but maybe we'll deal with Freud. Is this stuff any good? Not nearly as good as a lot of flunky Marxist Freudians thought in the 60s. I mean, Freud and Marx were thought to be the end-all and be-all thinkers amongst a lot of flunkies in the 60s. And both were basically, when you like Marx styled his communism or whatever as scientific socialism. Very scientific. Of course, he was comparing and contrasting it with his predecessors. He called his predecessors utopian socialists. And the funny thing is, he has the same, that same idea of a worker's paradise, and it's, like where the state withers away somehow or another, magically, and it obviously hasn't worked. They've created
Hey guys.
nothing for workers really, and it's definitely not a paradise. But is that a dog getting up?
Yep. Okay, come on, Elvis. Elvis, come. Okay.
Hi. Anyway, it's
He didn't notice.
yeah, I think it. Yeah, we had a little dog out the neck, but he didn't notice but he would have thought it was an intruder in the house. what Marx is, it's just mystification. I think that's one of the words he used about other capitalist stuff. Mystification. Wow, it doesn't get more mystifying and mystified than Marxism. And Freudianism is somewhat the same way. No, these essays are pretty obvious. He deals with things that he calls perversions. Is that what he calls it? And so he's, he's talking about sadomasochism. He says it's the same thing, and I suspect that there are some people who are sadomasochistic. There are some people are just masochistic. There's some people who are sadists, but he seems to think it's the same thing. Yeah, kind of a weird interpretation, misinterpretation. And pulsion seems to be the French for drive. Pulsion sexuelle, sex drive. Chez les neurotics, chez les nevrosés. So, he calls it perversions. Well, that's the translation in French. Le facteur psychique dans les perversions. And I think most of these things, perversions, like that's a strong word. It's just like different kind of things that turn people on. I would say sadism is a perversion. It's I don't feel much sympathy for sadness. And same sort of thing. I feel sorry for people who are sadomasochists, for the masochistic side of their personality, but not for the sadistic part. That I consider a perversion. And there's always going to be an imbalance when a person, a sadist finds a masochist who wants to get mistreated. So, I think people have got something like that, like where they've got a problem. They should keep it to themselves. And that's the trouble with sadists. They don't want to keep it to themselves. People got a problem. They should keep it to themselves. You hear that, you sadists out there? People like Michelle. Now, so Isaac Asimov's das Basics over the 100 basic questions about science. So really means over, but it can mean a lot of things. That's the trouble with prepositions. Very little one-on-one match. So what temperature can a star reach to? And so these really are questions, and then he answers it according to what he thinks is. ¿Qué es un agujero negro? So what's a black hole? Black hole is nothing. It doesn't exist. It's just an invention. It comes from Albert Einstein's idea that light is a particle. There's got to be some sort of gravitational attraction on light as a result. There's not a particle. So black holes don't need for light would not be dragged in by a heavy and massive object. Why did he invent that? Because he was saying there's no medium for light going through a vacuum, i.e. outer space.